Nobody in that conference room believed that firing a quiet man in a wrinkled blazer could bring an entire company to its knees in 5 days. When Christopher Hayes was asked to leave the room mid-meeting right as a $2 billion acquisition was entering its final phase, he didn't fight back, didn't raise his voice, didn't appeal to anyone around the table for support. He stood up, straightened the folder in front of him, and said one sentence, "You just signed something you don't understand." Then he walked out. Day 1, the press celebrated. Day 2, the numbers stopped making sense. Day 3, the partner firm threatened litigation. Day 4, the investors started making calls they weren't supposed to make. Day 5, the deal collapsed entirely, and the CEO of Harlow Capital Group stood in her office, realizing that the man she had fired in front of 12 witnesses was the only person who had ever understood the machine she had been running. If you have ever been the person in the room who knew exactly what was wrong and been ignored anyway, this story will stay with you for a long time. Christopher Hayes was 32 years old, and the kind of man who was easy to overlook. He drove a 7-year-old sedan with a car seat in the back. He brought his lunch to work in a reusable container. His office, if you could call it that, a glass-walled cubicle tucked in the far corner of the 14th floor, was stacked with printed spreadsheets, color-coded binders, and 2 monitors running data feeds that nobody else in the building fully understood. He wore the same rotation of business casual clothing, none of it expensive, and he rarely attended the after-work drinks that the executive team organized to maintain what they called culture. What he did do, with a precision that bordered on obsessive, was build systems, risk models, specifically, the kind that mapped the invisible architecture beneath financial transactions, not just what was visible on the surface of a deal, but the hidden stress points, the deferred liabilities, the contractual clauses buried inside clauses, the cash flow assumptions that looked correct from one angle and catastrophic from another. He had been doing this for 6 years at Harlow Capital Group, and in that time, he had quietly prevented 3 deals from going sideways and flagged 2 regulatory issues that would have resulted in significant penalties. None of those interventions had appeared in a press release. None of them had come up in his annual review in any meaningful way. He was a senior risk analyst, and he was paid accordingly, not badly, but not in a way that reflected the actual load-bearing function he served inside the organization. He was also, since his daughter Lily turned 6 months old and her mother left for a position overseas with no intention of returning, doing all of this while raising a child alone. Lily was 6 now. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and every morning Christopher dropped her at school with her backpack and a hand-packed lunch, and every evening he was at the gate when the bell rang, unless a deal was active, in which case his neighbor, Mrs. Paulson, a retired schoolteacher who had become something like a grandmother to Lily by necessity, picked her up and kept her fed until Christopher came home. He was not a man who complained. That was the thing people who did pay attention to him noticed first. He absorbed the weight of his life without editorializing about it. And he brought that same quality to work. He did not perform busyness. He did not inflate the importance of his findings. He delivered what the data said and left it to other people to decide what to do with it. That was, it turned out, a significant problem. Amelia Grant was 35, the CEO of Harlow Capital Group, and she had built her reputation on being decisive in situations that paralyzed other executives. She was sharp, composed under pressure, and genuinely good at reading people, or so she believed. She had been appointed CEO 18 months earlier by a board that wanted aggressive growth. And she had delivered, leading the company through 2 successful acquisitions that had expanded their portfolio considerably. She wore her authority easily and wasn't unkind, but she had developed a tendency common among executives who move fast of trusting the loudest confident voice in the room over the quietest accurate one. Jonathan Blake was 40, the chief investment officer, and he was everything Christopher was not in terms of surface presentation. He was tall, well-dressed, and spoke in the kind of measured baritone that made rooms fall quiet when he entered. He had been at Harlow for 8 years, had cultivated a close relationship with 3 board members, and had overseen the 2 previous acquisitions that had made Amelia's tenure look successful. He believed, with the full weight of his ego behind it, that he understood risk better than anyone on his team, which was partly why he had never invested serious time in understanding what Christopher actually built. The deal that was now at the center of everything was the acquisition of a mid-sized logistics and financial services company called Meridian Bridge Holdings. The price tag was $2 billion. The strategic rationale was sound. Meridian's infrastructure would give Harlow a platform in a market segment they had been trying to enter for 4 years. The board had been pushing for this deal for 6 months. The timeline was aggressive. Jonathan had negotiated a closing window that gave Harlow's internal teams less than 3 weeks to complete due diligence on a company whose financial architecture was, to put it generously, complex. Christopher had been assigned to build the risk model for the Meridian acquisition 3 weeks before the story began. He had taken the assignment with his usual silence and disappeared into his data. By the end of the first week, he had a working model. By the end of the second, he had something that kept him awake at night. The first signal had appeared as a small discrepancy, a cash flow projection in Meridian's escrow structure that didn't reconcile cleanly with the reported revenue from their secondary services division. In isolation, it looked like a rounding error, but Christopher had trained himself really to follow discrepancies the way a doctor follows a faint irregularity on a scan. Not with panic, but with methodical attention until it either resolved or revealed itself as something more serious. It revealed itself as something more serious. Buried inside the escrow arrangement was a conditional liability clause, a provision that activated under specific market conditions and obligated the acquiring party to absorb a significantly larger financial exposure than headline deal implied. The clause was legal. It was also, in Christopher's careful reading, almost certainly intentional, a structure designed to shift risk onto the acquirer in a way that would only become visible after the transaction had already closed. He estimated the potential additional exposure at somewhere between $150 million and $250 million, depending on market conditions over the next 18 months. He put this in writing. He sent an email to Jonathan Blake on a Tuesday afternoon, flagged urgent, with a 12-page attached analysis and a clear recommendation. Delay closing by 48 hours to allow for independent legal review of the escrow structure. He was not asking to kill the deal. He was asking for 2 days. The response came the following morning, 6 words. "We've already had legal review it." Christopher wrote back the same afternoon. He explained, specifically, which clause his concern addressed and why the existing legal review may not have examined it through the right interpretive lens. He attached a comparison model showing the financial exposure under 3 different market scenarios. He asked again for the 48-hour delay. No response came. He tried a different channel. He sent a summary to Marcus Webb, Harlow's general counsel, with a note flagging the specific language in the Meridian escrow structure. Marcus forwarded it to Jonathan, who sent Christopher a calendar invite for a brief alignment meeting, which turned out to be a 5-minute conversation in which Jonathan explained, with the patience of someone addressing a junior employee who had misunderstood his scope, that the deal team was fully aware of all relevant risk factors and that Christopher's role was to model scenarios, not to evaluate legal structure. Christopher left that meeting and went back to his desk. He updated the model. He added a 4th scenario, the one he had been reluctant to build, which assumed the escrow clause activated in its most aggressive form within the first calendar year. The projected loss in that scenario was substantial enough that he sat very still for a moment after running the numbers. He sent it to Amelia Grant directly, with a subject line that said, "Meridian Risk Model Addendum, please read before signing." Amelia was in back-to-back meetings that afternoon. Her assistant, who managed her inbox, flagged it as informational and moved it to the deal-related subfolder. Amelia saw the email exist in that folder. She did not open it. She had a board call at 4 o'clock and a dinner with the Meridian CEO at 7, and Jonathan had told her, twice, that the deal was clean. She trusted him. The closing meeting was scheduled for Thursday morning. 12 people in the room. Amelia, Jonathan, 4 members of the senior deal team, 2 outside legal representatives, the Meridian CEO, and 3 of his advisors. Christopher Hayes had been included on the original attendee list because he had built the risk model. That morning, 40 minutes before the meeting started, Jonathan's assistant sent a revised invite. Christopher's name was no longer on it. He went anyway. He took his printed analysis, walked to the 44th floor, and sat down at the edge of the conference table before anyone could say otherwise. Jonathan looked at him but said nothing initially. The meeting opened with a structured presentation of deal terms. Christopher waited. He waded through the term sheet summary. He waded through the legal sign-off recap. When the agenda moved to risk model review, he opened his folder. "I need to flag something before we move to execution," he said. The room turned toward him. Amelia looked up from her copy of the presentation deck. He had 3 minutes. He laid out the escrow clause issue